Yes, a very good morning to you. It's Wednesday, the 29th of July, 2020. Welcome back to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. My name's Pete Fairbairn. Every day I'm joined by one of the country's top sports journalists. And today I've got Jim Tucker with me. How are you, mate?
Mate, extremely good.
Plenty to talk about today. I noticed you've got the Steve Ward book on the bookshelf behind you there. It's the very same book as helping me to elevate my laptop for this recording, so I already know we'll find plenty of common ground. We will talk some cricket, but we're going to start things off in rugby union, and really exciting news as reported in The Australian today, written by Wayne Smith. Really exciting news for Queensland rugby fans, but I think Australian rugby fans in general, with Jordan Petaia predicted to finally return from injury for the Queensland Reds this weekend as they take on the Brumbies in a top-of-the-table Super Rugby AU clash. Petaia, of course, a precocious talent. We haven't seen a lot of him in his first couple of years as a professional, with a serious ankle injury first and then a serious shoulder injury. Smith details in the article that of his last 9 games, 3 were for the Wallabies. A couple of them were for different Brisbane club rugby sides when he was trying to get match fitness before that World Cup. And really, it's the Reds who've seen the least of him. So, Jim, as somebody who's followed the Wallabies and the Reds extremely closely in your time covering that sport, how exciting is it to have Jordan Petaia back, and what sort of influence do you think he can have?
Well, it's massive, Pete. He is a exceptional talent. Tim Horan, the Prince of Centres, basically tagged him. He is the future of Australian rugby arriving today. Like, he is the full package, and that's on both sides of the ball. Lovely footwork. He can throw a very sympathetic path to set up a winger. He tackles well, and he understands the game well. He'll catch a high ball for you. And the way he slotted into a Rugby World Cup in Japan last year, and from that first game against Uruguay, the spin move finished off for a try, and even in the losing quarter-final against England, he played a really good opening passage in that game. So he's an exciting player to watch. Also, every little bit of time away from the game, he probably gets the chance to catch up on the other important side, which is the off-field side, because huge expectations on him last year. And hopefully he's had a mentor that's just given him a little bit of calmness to deal with all the spotlight that was flashed on him last year, and is certainly going to come again this year. But he's going to get some footy that he never expected to play, because Super Rugby was completely off the table when he did his collarbone earlier in the year. He'll get to play some footy, which is hugely important for him.
And just quickly, that combination with James O'Connor potentially. Now, I know O'Connor playing 10 for the Reds at the moment, but many think it's likely we'll see a 12-13 Wallabies combination of O'Connor-Petaia. Is that the way you'd be looking?
Well, that's a really nice combination, because you have O'Connor's not the bolt through the hole type player he once was, but he's far less selfish, and he's very sympathetic about setting up players around him, and he's quite a nurturing figure at the Reds now, which is, again, not what he was at the start when everything was all about Brand O'Connor. So that's a nice balance, Petaia and O'Connor, but then you can throw in a Tamura or Iris Samone from the Brumbies is really building a case as well. He's a bit of a bolter. So, nice look. But Petaia gives them the cutting edge at outside centre. So he's essential, whatever they have inside.
We move from rugby union to the AFL, and AFL Operations Manager Steve Hocking sent out a statement yesterday basically calling on the participants of the game at the professional level to ease off on any public commentary around the performance of AFL umpires. We know that AFL umpires have sacrificed just as much as coaches, players, other staff during this pandemic, and we've had AFL umpires up here in Queensland in the hub lockdown. A couple of very public rebukes, I guess. Hawthorn coach Alastair Clarkson, another comment on the weekend when he spoke about the Sydney Swans having an extra man on the field. Josh Jenkins tweeting when Geelong were playing, asking whether they should let the umpires back into the hotel after the game. And Hocking essentially sending out what is a final warning for all the games participants. Public commentary and criticism of the umpire's performance will not be tolerated. Punishments will be dished out. In the case of Alastair Clarkson, he's got form in this space, of course, famously saying a few years ago, I don't want to make any comments about the disgusting umpiring because I'll get myself in trouble. Well, he did. He got a $15,000 fine for that one. And he's as I say, an extra man was the language he used on the weekend, which is about as offensive as it can get when you question an umpire's neutrality. Yet Clarkson gets off scot-free with a final warning along with the rest of the competition. Is Alastair Clarkson a lucky man that his wallet's not a little bit lighter this morning, Jim?
I think he is very lucky. And I think even in that space of the popular sport of bagging umpires, you've got to be consistent. Like you look at, in a stress situation, the officials of other clubs, and they just want to see the same level of rebuke given to anyone who makes those comments. So you go a little bit deeper and you look at where Hawthorn are at, and is Clarkson trying to throw a distracting curveball with a team that he has that's not going very well. Like everyone has to confess that his team's not going well, and maybe he's that angry man because of that most of all, but that doesn't give him the right to have a crack at referees, umpires, whatever the officials are in with respective codes.
Yeah, he's the king of deflection. We've seen it over recent weeks. First, it was the commentary on the actual state of the game, coming out on the weekend, not only criticising the umpires, then talking about Sydney Swans player Tom Papley milking free kicks. And to your point, what it does is it means that we're talking about all of these comments Clarkson has made. It's the Eddie Jones effect in full force, because then we don't necessarily sit there and dissect another disappointing performance from a Hawthorn team who've lost 4 in a row, who are the oldest team in the competition and look like they desperately require regeneration, but the headlines are saved for another week there. We're going to, speaking of Eddie Jones, we are going to head over to Old Blighty and to England, where English cricketer Stuart Broad has become just the 4th player in history, or the 4th fast bowler, I should say, to take 500 test wickets. Reaching that milestone in the English victory over the West Indies to seal a 2-1 series victory there overnight. Broad joins compatriot Jimmy Anderson, the great Glenn McGrath, and of course Courtney Walsh as the others in that exclusive club. I know he hasn't been a friend of Australian cricket fans over the journey, Stuart Broad, but he certainly has been a magnificent player. I want you to talk me, Jim, through a little bit of Stuart Broad's career and the type of player he's been, but also with the advent of T20 cricket and the calendar constantly evolving, that we see less test cricket these days than we have in years gone by. Will Broad be the last fast bowler to reach 500 test wickets?
It's a big question. I don't think so. I think you'll see the very best still be able to soar past 500. I grew up in an era where Dennis Lilly was the benchmark, and he got to 355 test wickets, and people thought, wow, that is untouchable. No one will get to that figure. And then suddenly we've seen Warney come along, the metronomic Glenn McGrath, Courtney Walsh, players of that ilk who've soared past 500. And I think it's really, you look at Broad's action, it's very economical, and he can repeat the action. And even though there's stress on the body, it's also an action that saves his body. And I think that's the key. You look at McGrath's action. It was just a really an action that could generate great pace, but also there was longevity to that action, and I think that's the key. But Broad, he's reinvented himself. That's the most exciting thing. Like in 3, 4, 5 occasions, you could say his career's over. Like he's run out of steam. He's not bowling fast enough, not being penetrative enough, but he's taking a new ball and he's got 500 test wickets, so huge credit to him.
Yeah, great article from Michael Vaughan in the Telegraph in the UK overnight, and he talks about Broad bowling up to kind of 84, 85 miles an hour in this test match, which is really the fastest he's bowled in years. And to your point, on numerous occasions, including Ashes tours down under, it's looked like Stuart Broad's nearing the end, but has managed to persevere and find a way through. He's certainly not somebody who would come to mind immediately when you think of the great fast bowlers in Test cricket history, but he's absolutely got to be in that conversation now through his sheer weight of wickets.
Well, I mean, one Stuart Broad spell, and sadly Australia has to cop the receiving end, was his 8 for 15 at Trent Bridge back in 2015. I think my memory serves, Wisden rated that the best spell of the decade in terms of knocking over Australia for 60. I mean, that's ridiculous. And Broad had it on a string. The slips wicketkeeper, they were just doing acrobatics just to latch onto the edges that he was extracting. So in English conditions, with the Duke's ball, he's unplayable at times. I really like his ability when he gets on song in a spell. The great bowlers, when they have the ball on a string, batsmen don't stand a chance. It doesn't always happen, but you get in that zone and you see the ball dominating.
Not quite up there with my favourite ever spell in Test cricket, that 7 for 2 from Curtly Ambrose, but 8 for 15. I remember watching that with my English housemate at the time. Not a lot of fun for me. We're going to move from cricket into football. Story from Joe Barton via the News Corp Australia Wire that I've taken from the Australian this morning. Looking that the Football Federation Australia is headed for a huge standoff with the players over an expected slashing of next season's A-League salary cap. A move which could trigger a star-studded exodus. We know the broadcast deal has been massively reduced. We've seen a similar situation happen in the NBL, where the salary cap cuts allowed some of their more high-profile players to take up the option to walk out on deals rather than taking those cuts. But the reason this is headed for a massive impasse, there's two reasons. One, of course, the players don't want to take a pay cut, those who do want to stay and play in this competition. But two, the way the collective bargaining agreement is negotiated between the players and the game, if they were to choose to not accept these deals and be released on a free transfer, they wouldn't actually be free until September 1, which is after a lot of the overseas transfer windows have already closed and would leave them with very minimal options. So they've been backed into a corner a little bit here, the players, if this were to go ahead. Jim, I want to ask you, would a large salary cap cut to the A-League like this and the expected departure of some of its stars, would that be a death knell for a competition already on its knees?
Oh, I think the A-League has got great gravitas through retaining recognisable faces and not changing every year. When Beshart Barisha, for example, was at his peak, it was just a constant goal-scoring marvel from Europe, and you just needed that consistency. So the A-League could have poster boys because it was such a fresh league, and that's at risk now. You can't have a vast turnover of players every season because the fringe person who's watching on TV just can't connect with the players. Like the issue for the A-League is that football above any code is so international and is so established that players just have 5 clubs in their career. So a Argentinian player in the A-League, he won't think twice about not so much loyalty, but he's thinking about himself and his career and his family. He'll just go, okay, this league shut down or this league can't pay me my money. I'm going to look for French second division. There's so many football options out there. So it's a really tricky period for the A-League and one their administrators have to really get on top of. By the same token, you don't want to be brutish and create this image that the A-League's a really hard league to play in and they play hardball and you can't get out of a contract in really stressful COVID times and go and play in Europe and just play your trade. So they've got to come up with a nice balance.
Yeah, of course, new team entering the competition this year in Western United and next year with MacArthur Rams coming in as well. So you've got to worry about the depth if they were to lose a lot of their best players right as they expand. Our final story this morning, Jim, comes from the Sydney Morning Herald, and Roy Masters, one of Australia's most celebrated journalists for many a decade, he's written a fascinating article looking at the bright young stars, the Joseph Suaalii, the David Fifitas. We're not going to talk about them in depth because I feel like we've been there, done that, but they could only hope to prove as steadfast as the NRL's oldies. Masters looking at players like, of course, 37-year-old Cameron Smith, 33-year-old Roosters twins Brett and Josh Morris, Mitch Orbison, who'll be the same age come semi-final, Sonny Bill Williams coming in at 35, Benji Marshall, Michael Jennings, these types of players and the influence and impact that they're having on the competition as some of the game's elite players, despite being on the other side of 30. And essentially, Masters saying to the clubs desperate to sign up a Suaalii or to pay huge money for a David Fifita, that there's an element of a player's experience and their time in the game, giving them the mindset and the emotional freedom to actually go out and perform without having to worry about any of the outside noise, giving them the ability to shut out what's happening during the week outside of training time, and to just go out there and focus on playing good footy. Essentially, that those veteran players have never been more important. We know in Super Rugby, AFL, very rare to see many players over the age of 30 continuing to be selected in those competitions. The NRL quite different in that sense. I want to ask you, Jim, are the genuine veterans in the NRL competition, are they leading the way for their younger contemporaries? And is this, I suppose, an approach that teams like the Broncos with such a young roster should be looking at very closely, whether they can inject more experience?
Oh, 100%. The feet might be slowing down on some of these players, but very fast between the two ears. And that's really the intellectual property of any sport, is just how you can control a game, how you can map out plays 2 or 3 plays ahead, essentially. And like Cameron Smith's a absolutely brilliant example. And Benji Marshall, again, someone who was written off a number of years ago, went to rugby to try and find a niche there, but came back to rugby league, and he's had a new lease of life. Very shrewd player. But isn't that what it's always been? That mix of experience with the young player, because you need to sit at the knee of a legend to just find out how the game's played and how it unfolds. Ricky Stewart gave a really interesting idea about rugby league. He said, with young players, they don't realise how much time's left. So he used to have a 5-minute bell saying, okay, the last 5 minutes of a game, there's so much time. So he used to just have 5-minute plays, and it got through to the head of young players. Gee, there's an awful lot of time in 5 minutes. You don't have to push the pass or gamble in the very first 30 seconds of the last 5 minutes, because there's so much time. So he just got them rehearsing through a final 5 minutes to know that don't panic. And that was trying to put experience into young heads. And that's what you're getting to, that these experienced players are just gold for the coat.
I think from a fan's perspective, there's nothing more enjoyable than being able to turn back the clock and watch, someone like Benji. His performance against the Broncos 2 weeks ago was like watching him in his absolute prime. So that's also great to see from a fan's perspective. Jim, we've probably run out of time there. We're going to have to make things wrap up from here. But thank you for your time this morning. Great to have you back on the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Always plenty to talk about.